just killing them, but leaving them there to die slowly. The other services that turned up after the fact, standing around, laughing, joking, smoking, and so on, is possibly the worst movie out of America that wasn't made by Martin Scorsese.
Yeah, it's, policing, I don't know how it is in the rest of the world, but certainly in America it's broken, and it's been broken for a long time, and they fill our policing with ex-military people too, which is another bad thing, and there's lots of ways to reform the police in the United States, but the oligarchy doesn't want it. So let's remember what the police are there. They're not really there to keep you safe. They're there to protect the property of the oligarchies. And so even though these policemen were all African American, they're still saying that this was, because of systemic racism inside the policing in America. I think police in America are just they recruit the wrong people. They're out of control maniacs. They're hopped up on steroids. They don't live in the neighborhoods that they police in, so they don't see the citizenry in America as someone that they're supposed to serve. They see them as the enemy. And so, like, for instance, in Los Angeles, all the cops live 30 miles outside of the city, and then they drive into the city to police us like they're animals. So that's what happens. And there's really so we did a whole year of protests in the United States. It was the biggest protest in the history of our country. And what the Democrats did after that year of protests was they invented another police department, and they funded it with $2 billion. And then they gave many more millions of dollars to the police. It was the exact opposite of what their voters wanted them to do. So, again, we live in an oligarchy. That's why there will be no police reform, because the police serve the oligarchs. It's the same problem with everything. It's why we don't have health care in America, the richest country in the world. It's why the richest country in the world, half of the people here are poor or low income. It's 80% of workers live paycheck to paycheck in the richest country in the world, because people don't realize that the United States, the people in America think the United States is just regular corrupt. They don't understand that it's 100% corrupt, which is why we can send $100 billion to Nazis in Ukraine right in our faces, when we won't send $100 billion to the United States so that we can fix homelessness or give people health care or a living wage. And the people see that this is happening now, slowly starting to see. Whether they will get joined together and rise up, they need a leader to bring people together. And what's starting to happen in America is people on the left and the right are starting to see that they share a common interest. And that's what actually scares the oligarchy the most. And so if that happens, then maybe we can have some reform of the police. If that happens, maybe we can have health care in America. If that happens, maybe we can end these murderous wars for fossil fuels and hegemony, and maybe we can start investing in our own country. We don't have, we were supposed to get high-speed trains here during the first economic collapse in 2008. They were supposed to have high-speed trains all over America. They never built one. We don't have anything in the United States that other countries have. We don't have health care. We don't have transportation. We don't have living wage. We have education system that bankrupts you. And it's because our country is completely 100% bought by corporations, right? So we're living in a fascist state. And the trick they play is the Democrats and the Democrat liberal corporate-owned media, they try to trick you into thinking one party is fascist and one party isn't. So it keeps you inside that system thinking someone's actually fighting for you. There was nobody fighting for you inside the government of the United States. And that's what just got revealed when the lefty squad completely rolled over and became war pigs. So if you're a lefty, you're supposed to at least be against war. They're the biggest war pigs in the world, and they'll never stand up against the establishment to stick up for the people who got them there. So I know that's a long answer, and I know it started with what's wrong with policing in America, but what's wrong with policing in America is a symptom of what's wrong with America, is that we live in a 100% completely corrupt country where the gears of the government only work if it's lubricated with corruption, which is why we can send $100 billion at the snap of a finger to the most corrupt country in Europe, while we won't send $100 billion to fix homelessness in America.
Well, they do need a leader, and that leader needs to have a hat, Jimmy, but I'll not press you on that point this time, at least. The characteristic characteristics of fascism are many, but of course, one of them is that you have a rubber stamp parliament with one party in it. And that was proved all over again this week, wasn't it? The Republicans had run on a ticket that criticized this huge largesse being given to the most corrupt country in Europe. But when push came to shove, they have now agreed to send the very same money. So we have absolute bipartisanship in stuffing the mouths of the oligarchs in Ukraine, as long as they kick enough of it back to the United States through the military-industrial complex and the politicians themselves. Am I right?
Of course, you're 100% right, and that's why people hate me from both parties in America. I get a lot of vitriol, especially from the Democrats, because I keep pointing out that the Democrats aren't different than the Republicans, that on all the major issues, they serve the same people. Ralph Nader famously said the only difference between a Democrat and Republican is the speed at which their knee hits the ground when a donor walks in the room. And so the way we do politics in America is we only have two parties that are viable, and they're both bought and paid for by the same people. So it's just, I don't know if you ever heard of the Harlem Globetrotters, but they're a basketball team in the United States, and they play every game against the Washington Generals, and they always beat them, and it's because they're being paid by the same guy. It's a show, and that's what's happening in the United States. And when I tell people that the Democrats aren't a lesser or two evil, they say I'm enabling fascists. Joe Biden and the Democrats are bigger fascists than Trump ever even tried to be. They just crushed a railroad strike. So railroad workers don't get sick leave in the United States. Railroad workers, the glue that holds our economy together, they won't even give those people sick pay. That's how corrupted our whole culture and system is over here. And so they were going to go on strike, and they would have got it. They would have got it like that. Joe Biden and the Democrats, after just running an election saying you have to vote for us because we're the ones who are going to protect democracy and the Republicans are fascists, they immediately committed fascism and instituted a strike break. They broke that strike, passed a law that they had to accept the contract or it was illegal. So that's what the Democrats are. They're actually in bed with big business to crush workers. That's the definition of fascism. And I'm not beating around the bush. Joe Biden and the Democrats are fascist. We live in a fascist country. And the idea that Joe Biden and the Democrats are fighting fascism is a narrative the Democrat and the corporate media wants you to believe. They are fascists, and the Democrats are not a lesser of two evils. They are a greater of two evils. If Trump right now was saber rattling and trying to starting wars with two nuclear powers, which is what Joe Biden's doing, people would be screaming bloody murder with their hair on fire. But because the corporate news media owned by the military-industrial complex says it's okay, and Joe Biden's supposed to not be crazy like Trump, then nobody cares. They literally get people to go along with the Ukraine war as if Putin is some kind of a madman and we're not. We're occupying a third of Syria right now. And why are we occupying it? For the oil. Who said that? The President of the United States admitted that our foreign policy is based on stealing other countries' fossil fuels, which is what we're doing right now. And somehow in America, everybody just thinks Putin's bad and Ukraine's bad. They have no idea that America, the United States government, and their military are the world's terrorists.
Now, there is one man who's beginning to stand out as a difference, and it's the man that you just mentioned. The man that we were told was so crazy he might start the Third World War, and therefore we better elect our grandpa, Joe Biden, in order to avert it. He said this week, first it's the tanks, then it's the nukes. He said this week that we are heading inexorably, he didn't use that word, he doesn't use big words, he said we were heading into a disaster. Are his supporters listening to him? If so, that's at least 70 million people we've got on our side in the anti-war cause, isn't it?
I would, that would be nice if that was true, but of course it's not, right? So most Republicans are on board, just like most Democrats are on board for war, and they always will be. So the weird thing is that there used to be token opposition to war in the United States from the left, from the far left. There is no far left in America anymore. They're not. The Democratic Party is a right-wing party, as the Republican Party. The odd thing is the only people that actually try to do something and stand up against war has been the far right wing. So it used to be the far right wing and the far left wing would oppose war and imperialism, but now it's just the far right wing. And Donald Trump was way less of a warmonger than Joe Biden and Barack Obama, that's for sure. And George Bush. And let's remember that Barack Obama was not a departure from George Bush. He was a continuation of that same policy. And why was he allowed to become president? Because he serves that same oligarchy and corporatocracy. His entire cabinet, Barack Obama's entire cabinet, WikiLeaks revealed, was chosen by Citibank already. So when Barack Obama became president, he didn't end those wars, and he took us from 2 wars to 7. He dropped more bombs than George Bush. He deported more Hispanics than twice as many as Donald Trump. He built the cages that they were putting immigrants in. So Barack Obama he kicked 5.1 million families out of their homes while he made sure the bankers got their bonuses. So this idea that the Democrats and Republicans are different, they're not. They actually serve the exact same people, which is why we're living in the country we live in right now. And I don't have any hope for it getting better unless people get in the streets. What is starting to happen is Amazon, there's a man named Christian Smalls who organized Amazon workers at a fulfillment center in New York City in a borough called Staten Island. Now, Staten Island is mostly white, and the people there are Trump voters. And so there was a black guy who came along, organized Trump voters in a union against Amazon. And so when people say we have to organize along class lines, that's what it means. It means organizing with Trump voters. But Democrats will never do that because the people who own them want to keep us divided and keep pretending that my enemy is my neighbor in America. My neighbor is not my enemy. My enemy is the oligarchs that control both parties, but they want me to hate my neighbor because of the economic pain we're feeling because the oligarchy did a controlled demolition of our economy during COVID, which we all know now came with zero science. And they want me to be angry at my neighbor because of the pain I'm feeling because my neighbor wouldn't take a vaccine that never worked the way they said it did in the first place. Well, I'm not going to hate my neighbor. I'm going to join with my neighbor, just like Christian Smalls did with Amazon, and I'm going to join against the oligarchy, and that's the only way to beat these guys.
Now, the congressional head of the Foreign Affairs Committee, the new guy, a Republican, has endorsed the view of the American general who said this week that within 2 years the U.S. will be at war with China. Did that cause any waves in the U.S.? Or are people just going quietly into these good nights?
People are going quietly. It didn't erase. No one. It's only a story if the corporate news decides it's a story. So the corporate news decided it wasn't a story, and that's it. We only have 6 media companies in America. That's another reason why the Democrats are not the lesser of two evil. When I was young, we used to have 50 giant media companies in America, right? That's still consolidated, but 50. We had 50 giant media companies. When Bill Clinton became president in 1996, he got rid of all the regulations, and so now they've consolidated the media power. There's only 6 media companies in the entire country, and so if you want to be a journalist, you have to work for one of the 6 oligarch corporations, and they control everything, as Chomsky taught us, with their 5 filters of propaganda. The first one is ownership. So there's nowhere to get that information that general said, or if you get that information, there's nobody to put it in context. The person who they have on the corporate news in America to tell you what that general meant when he said that, they'll bring on a guy from a weapons manufacturing company, somebody from Raytheon or Boeing. They'll bring on an ex-general who's working to sell more weapons to try to tell you what that guy said. That means it's good. We have to go to war with China. We have to do this. And they always say it's because we're defending democracy. What they're defending is their American hegemony, imperialism, and these are all wars for economic and fossil fuels. What's happening right now in Europe? Russia was supplying what 30-40% of the energy to Europe. We Americans wanted some of that, and so now America all of a sudden is selling more liquefied natural gas to Europe as they blow up the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. So I don't know. They do it right out in the open, as Chris Hedges says. Now they just lie, cheat, and steal right out in the open, and nobody does anything. Can people not? And it's weird to me that the people in Europe are putting up with this Ukraine thing as if anybody gives a shit about the people in Ukraine, because they don't. What they want to do is get those people slaughtered in a proxy war for American hegemony. And you're a moron if you think that the United States is sending $100 billion in arms to a country because we care about the people. Look how much we cared about the Iraq people. Look how much we cared about the Libyan people. Look how much we cared about the Syrian people. Look how much we care about the Yemen people. Look how much we care about the Somalian people. We don't care about. Look about Afghanistan. 20 years we tortured those people. We didn't even know who the bad guys or the good guys were over there, as the Afghanistan papers revealed. We're the criminals. The United States are the terrorists, and Europe, for going along with them, are cowards.
Yeah, cowards and fools. Lastly, and it's not something we expected to be talking about tonight because it is literally becoming more clear by the minute. But it seems clear enough, certainly for the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times to deliver an ex cathedra verdict on it, that the attacks on Iran last night were mounted by Israel, which means, of course, they were paid for by the United States. The armaments that were used were likely supplied by the United States. If true, would this be Israel acting on its own, of its own volition, or is this a deliberate move to open yet another war front by the U.S. administration?
So, yes, the United States has wanted to overthrow the government in Iran for a while, and that's why if you in the corporate media, so whenever the United States wants to go do a coup and overthrow a government, what you see in the corporate media in the United States is how oppressed their people are. So that's what we've been seeing right away, is that the Iranian women want freedom, and they want to take off their headscarves and all that stuff. They want freedom. And so we're supposed to all be, so we're being flooded with these stories of courageous women standing up against the regime in Iran. And when, as soon as you see that, of course, all the morons in America, they believe it, they take it at face value that now we got to go help these people. But of course they do that because the United States, as an economic hegemon, wants to do that. They want to do it to help Israel. They want to do it for their own good. Again, the United States is the word. So Wesley Clark, General Wesley Clark, famously said on a show called Democracy Now! About after 9/11, he went to the Pentagon. He was a general, went to the Pentagon, and he was told, he was shown papers that before 9/11, they had already drawn up plans to invade all the countries that they've been invading. Iraq, Iran, Syria, Libya, Sudan. We're betting all those goddamn countries, Afghanistan. So this has nothing to do with what they tell you about. And so yes, again, the United States, Israel, the irony is Saudi Arabia, Israel, the United States are the world's biggest terrorists, have been for the last 40 years, and ain't nothing going to change that.
Jimmy Dore, a pleasure as always to talk with you. Host of the Jimmy Dore Show, comedian, raconteur, political analyst, razor sharp, and one day, I hope, the next president of the... Every other Saturday, the Netherlands, Portugal, Spain, Greece are not going to fight Russia. Turkey's definitely not going to fight Russia. In fact, they'll be on Russia's side. So what does all this mean? It means that these people are threatening Russia with America's army. So those of you... sons and daughters to die in the frozen wastes of Eastern Europe for the fate of cities you can't pronounce, can't spell, and had never heard of before. As I keep saying, how much does it matter to you on which side of a border lies Kupiansk when it's been in 4 different countries in the last 100 years, but worse, much worse than that? Because if the American army fights the Russian army in Ukraine, that can only lead to one outcome: nuclear war. Think about it. If the American army began to prevail and advance towards the Russian border with its avowed intention of dismembering Russia, breaking it, balkanizing it, and taking it over for corporate America, Russia would have to use its nuclear weapons. Ditto if the Russian army began to defeat the American army on the ground in Ukraine. America would have to use its nuclear weapons. Otherwise, Russia might roll all the way to Paris. They'd be unwise to come to London in the midst of our crime wave. Who would want to roll London? Certainly not the current mayor, who's more interested in other things that we'll come to in a minute. The use of first battlefield, then intermediate, and then in the ultimate nightmare, intercontinental ballistic missiles, of which Russia's are far better than the nuclear weapons of NATO, acknowledged by all experts, would literally end all life on this planet. And I don't even mean all human life, I mean all life. Even the fabled cockroaches could not survive the blasts, the radiation, and the nuclear winter that would ensue. So think about it. When you see this dancing girl, this dancing queen, this disco queen, Prime Minister of Finland, a fly buzzing around the Russian bear, warning, threatening, pointing her finger, clenching her fist, and declaring in her hipster way, Vladimir Putin is so over. What they're really saying is that you Americans will be required to ensure he's so over, because we in Finland couldn't fight our way out of a wet paper bag. And in any case, like all the other NATO countries, Finland merely a candidate at this point, but effectively a NATO outpost now. You've given away all your ammunition. You've given away all your weapons. Quite apart from the lack of fighting spirit, quite apart from the lack of numbers, you don't have the wherewithal to fight a war with Russia. If Russia wanted to, it could conquer Berlin. Who's going to stop it? And that brings me to my last point. The Germans have decided to send their tanks to fight Russia. Take a second to let that sink in.
Yeah, it's cold out.
Leopard tanks with German insignia upon them are being given to Ukraine to fight Russians. And if they cross the lines of Lugansk and the Donbass, they'll be on Russian territory. German tanks on Russian territory. What could possibly go wrong? Think about it. Whilst your seatbelts are fully fastened, because we've got a bumpy show for you tonight. This is the mother of all talk shows.
Mr. President, we got a report of a 50-foot woman marauding through Washington, sir. Thank you, Captain. But I'm looking for a shorter woman, one who
likes to take long strolls in the park and yell at minorities. She's not looking for a date. She's terrorizing the city. Is there a difference? A little levity. Call in the military. We are the military, sir. Boy, we got here fast. We better do something, right? Shall I scramble the jets, Mr. President? No, thanks. I'll just take a muffin and some coffee. You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Now, you're welcome to agree or disagree, of course, with anything I've said, anything my guests are going to say. And whether you agree or disagree, call these numbers. It's entirely free. In the UK and Ireland, it's 08081965522. In the US, it's +1 844 944 3344. That's the US and Canada. It's toll free, will cost you nothing at all. And if you're in the perhaps mythical rest of the world, the number is 44203 966 2625. That's 44203 966 2625. You need to vote in our poll. 16-year-olds should be legally able to change gender by self-declaring. This is a raging controversy in Britain, but not only in Britain. A, agree. B, disagree. At the moment, on the Twitter, it's agree 18%, disagree 82%. On YouTube, it's agree 9%, disagree 91%. On Telegram, it's agree 3% and disagree 97%. And on the YouTube community poll, it's agree 4%, disagree 96%. Thousands of people have voted already. You can get your vote in by the end of the show. Now, I have the great honor in life of knowing that I am a personal friend of Julian Assange, the world historic political prisoner languishing in a dirty dungeon in southeast London, in Belmarsh jail, in as harsh a prison regime as it's possible to imagine in 2023 in Britain, surrounded by terrorists and head-chopping, throat-cutting Islamist fanatics, child killers, and foul murderers of all kinds. And there sits this gentle journalist, Julian Assange, convicted of nothing, held in Belmarsh on an extradition matter. And of course, we're now reaching the witching hour in the case of Julian Assange. My first guest, Kevin Gostola, has just written a book, a very fine book, about the case of Julian Assange. A clear, political trial, case, procedure. Julian has committed no crime except telling the truth. And Kevin has told the truth about Julian so brilliantly in this book, we had to have him on. He's the author and co-host, he's the author of Guilty of Journalism, the political case against Julian Assange, and co-host of Unauthorized Disclosure and curator of the Dissenter newsletter. Kevin, thank you for joining us. Let's start with Julian and your book. When did you decide to write it? How long did it take? And give us the essentials of the case you're making.
Yeah, the book is a long-term project. It goes back to the reporting that I did in 2012 and 2013 on Chelsea Manning, who you might recall is the whistleblower who provided the documents to Julian Assange and WikiLeaks that were published, for which he's been criminalized for sharing this information with the world. And it contains reporting that I did on U.S. whistleblowers, like CIA whistleblower John Kiriakou, Edward Snowden, Jeffrey Sterling, a CIA whistleblower, Daniel Hale, a drone whistleblower who right now is being held in a U.S. prison in conditions that are typically for terrorists, so much whistleblowers like Julian Assange being in the Belmarsh high security prison. We have a drone whistleblower here in the United States who is getting this communications management unit treatment that perhaps Julian Assange will be subjected to if he were detained or imprisoned here in the United States. I started this. This is a culmination of a lot of work, but really, with this looming trial, which we have to, as you said, we're in the witching hour. You have to admit that we're getting extremely close to that moment in which there won't be options available for Assange to prevent him from being put on a plane and brought to the United States. So I wanted to make sure there was a book available here for everyone who's a U.S. citizen in particular, but I'm sure it will be beneficial to those throughout the world to read and understand what's going to happen when the U.S. prosecutors bring him into a courtroom in Alexandria, Virginia, and arraign him and then put him through a 1 to 2 year ordeal at least, and try to put him behind bars for a long time for sharing with us a wealth of knowledge that I think has been beneficial to many, many people.
Now, some people will be saying to themselves, well, he'll get his day in court and we'll be able to hear what he has to say, maybe even see it. But that's not true, is it?
Yeah, no, and in fact, that's why I wrote the book, because it raises a whole range of issues, which, yes, we've heard about them minimally, just a bit from his defense attorneys in the extradition proceedings. But once he gets to a U.S. court, they will be deemed irrelevant by prosecutors as well as a judge. You have to understand that the U.S. court system, most of the judges are extraordinarily deferential to the U.S. security agencies. That would include the CIA, which I think has been a huge driver in bringing about the moment in which U.S. prosecutors finally charged him, and that we know that the first charge was filed in December 2017 while he was being spied upon by UC Global, which was supported by the CIA. They had an informal or formal partnership that was ongoing, in which they were able to know about the audio and video recordings that were being taken by UC Global. And so he's going to come into this courtroom, he's going to want to raise all these extra issues beyond the fact of whether he is guilty of violating the Espionage Act or not, which you shouldn't even have to bother with because that is a U.S. law, and Julian Assange is an Australian citizen. So why should an Australian or someone who is a foreigner have to follow a U.S. law? Why should he be criminalized, aside from the fact that he never signed a security, a non-disclosure agreement, which you do in order to get your security clearance. So Julian Assange never had a responsibility or an obligation like Chelsea Manning or John Kiriakou or Jeffrey Sterling to keep information secret. He could publish. We know that under the First Amendment here in the United States, we have protections that say that you can publish information, even hacked materials, you can publish that information, and yet Julian Assange is being punished, and in a courtroom, he'll only be able to argue that he didn't violate the Espionage Act, which gives him a very, very narrow means for defending himself. He won't be able to say, oh, the CIA targeted me, oh, this is a political case, oh, my health is deteriorating, and I shouldn't have to go through this. Any of these other things that we have heard and seen addressed in the extradition case.
And of course, this is not a case that's going to be heard in New York or in San Francisco. It's going to be held in Alexandria, Virginia, for a reason. It's a company town.
Yeah, and so he'll go through the district in which, over a decade ago, Dana Priest and William Arkin, they call it Top Secret America. And in this region, you have all these people who work for security contractors. They work for the CIA, the NSA. They have military families. They work in Washington. They could be staffers on Capitol Hill. Maybe they're lobbyists for some of these defense or security firms. Who knows? But they're going to be part of the jury pool. And if Julian Assange goes with
having a jury in his U.S. trial, were he to be put on trial in the United States, they will be prejudiced already, because you have to understand that while this is faded from our memory, there are still very raw emotions within these U.S. security agencies. They'll talk about this as if it was like the attack on Pearl Harbor when they had to deal with WikiLeaks documents being published. And they put together task forces, and there was panic. And this is the same way they feel about Edward Snowden and the disclosures that he gave us on NSA mass surveillance, and how our global privacy was being systematically violated by the U.S. government and its agencies. And so you just have to understand that there's not a lot of range available for Julian Assange to defend himself and to ensure that he will have fairness. If it's not a jury, he's going to get a U.S. judge, who I think I already made clear is going to be very deferential to these U.S. security agents who are telling these U.S. prosecutors, forget about what the risks may be to press freedom, forget about the risks to free speech or transparency and the flow of information. We need you to exact revenge on Julian Assange, to make it clear that we will not tolerate our secret documents being published by organizations like WikiLeaks.
Although they can't sit in a garage in Wilmington, Delaware, maybe we'll have time to say a word or two about that. But help us with this conundrum, Kevin. The New York Times, certainly, the Washington Post, presumably, published the stories that Julian Assange brought to us. They have a First Amendment right to publish them. No one would dream of putting the editor or the chairman of these powerful newspapers on trial in this case. So there would have been no story if Julian hadn't given them the story. They published the story. If it wasn't a crime to publish it, how can it be a crime to have handed over the notes on which the newspapers published the story?
Yeah, you make a very excellent point. And in fact, in my book, I make it clear with 3 specific examples that there have been media organizations that are guilty of aiding and abetting this prosecution. I have an example of CNN's coverage. I have an example from The Guardian, because David Lee published the password in his book that allowed for those U.S. state embassy cables to now be out in the wild, putting all kinds of people at risk, human rights activists, informants, people who the U.S. State Department claimed were vulnerable. That was because of David Lee, who was an editor for The Guardian. So I have those examples. But more broadly, there's a language in which the New York Times speaks about Julian Assange.
I'm just going to mention real quick that, because the videos keep getting deleted when I make them anyway, the agents that are surveilling me, it's still about the same as it's been the last couple of weeks. It's a couple times a day that I'll see someone following me around. And today it was that white car again. It's been the white car for quite a bit, actually. It's a white sedan. I got the plate number, and I say the plate number into the camera. But what keeps happening is every time I get them on camera, this has been happening for a couple months now. Every time I get them on camera, well, let me turn this. Anyway, their new thing is to delete the video, so the phone shuts off on me. Sometimes it restarts, sometimes it doesn't. I have to restart it myself. Either way, when it turns back on, the video that I'm making at that moment of them disappears. So he did it to me again tonight in that white car. The white car went by, I was already outside. I seen him go by, so I got the camera ready. Turned the camera on, walked down to the end of the driveway. He turned around at the end of the street, so I just kind of stood behind the bush. And then when he went by, I went out and got the plate number. He stopped at the end of the street, sat there for about 4 or 5 minutes, and then the phone did that trick on me. The phone shut off, restarted on its own, and the video was gone. But the other videos were also gone today. I had a moon video on there, and something else, some clouds or something, and those all disappeared too. So when I turned the phone on, I had to reset the phone and fuck around. Okay, so trying to remember the day. It was like 3 or 4 days ago. They were following me around, and I got to know the agent. He's a nice guy. He seems like a nice guy, Puerto Rican kid in his 20s. And anyway, he was following me around, so he couldn't help but bump into me a couple times. But he was very pleasant. Hi, how you doing? Hey, what's up? Small talk kind of thing. But I had already seen his face 5, 6 times probably already that week. So it was just too much to see somebody that much. He doesn't live in the neighborhood. He's some kind of delivery guy, supposedly, you know. So run into him every store you go to, the gas station. You start seeing his face everywhere. You're like, okay, something's up here. You know, he's never delivering. He's obviously not doing his job if he's supposed to be a delivery guy. And that's what he's doing. He's playing it off like he's a delivery guy. Turn this. But anyway, his van broke down. He broke a ball joint while he was following me. And so I turned the camera on. I walked down to get him. He was down at the bottom of the hill. So I walked down to get him on camera, and I did, and everything. And so on the way down the hill, I had him on camera, got the plate number, got his face because I had the camera on my body. It was the body cam. I walked up to my buddy's house, did something, dropped something off or some shit, turned around, came back. And then I asked him if he needed a hand and all that kind of shit. You know, he's like, oh, no, I can't do nothing. That's when he showed me the ball joint. And that's when I recognized it was the same dude. And I was laughing to myself. So anyway, I came back up the hill. And by the time I got to the top of the hill, I was talking to the camera just like I'm doing now. And all of a sudden the phone shuts off and fucking restarts on me. I'm like, son of a bitch. I knew it was going to be gone. And it was. The video was gone. And so I said, that's all right. I'll go back down and I'll get him again because he's still there. He's broken down, you know. And I had plenty of time. So I came in. I figured I'd hear the tow truck or something like that. I reset the camera. I had to reset the what do you call it? The chip there, the whatever the hell you call it, memory card. I had to reset that and everything like that. It took only like 5 minutes or something to do it all. I think I got something to drink and then headed back down the hill, and I walked. So this time I took a right, went down the street that way, got him on camera again. I didn't want to bug him in the car or anything, but I could hear him rattling around in the van and everything like that. And I took a right, and before I could do anything, all of a sudden the fucking camera died and did it again. I'm like, son of a bitch. But then the camera works fine for 4 or 5 days after that. You know what I mean? So, you know, they're only doing it, or whatever, 3 days in this case, before it did it again today, because that was a few days ago. And what a coincidence that it's always when I'm getting one of these agents on camera that all of a sudden the camera does that, you know. It's just funny. Yeah, so they're using a lot of technology that I don't have any, access to and stuff, so it's just worth mentioning. I mean, I'm listening to these guys talk, and they're talking about it, similar stuff like that, that they're all up our ass in every which way. And the average zombie citizen, the average zombie slave does not realize how bad it is. They just don't. They're stuck in some, I don't know, it's a zombieism, the programming. It's everyone around us, though. There has to be others like me out there that are awake. There has to be. They cannot possibly be that there's really